Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique Lone Kimono, its physical execution, some of the problems that arise from its physical execution, and how to compensate or fix some of those problems. So let's talk about the ideal phase of this technique. This is off of a left-hand direct lapel grab. Now before we actually get into the technique, let's talk about the possibilities that can occur here. Since they've already got the grab, there's one of three things that they can do. They can either push, do nothing, or they could pull. So let's talk about what happens with this technique and how we're going to deal with it. Now keep in mind that there are other techniques in the Kenpo system that deal with each of those scenarios, but they can also be applied in this scenario. We're just going to show you this technique and not move on to what the other techniques do. So let's take the first scenario of a push. The push actually is really good because it helps us, extends the elbow, and we can move into the first motion, no problem. The next is what the ideal is off of, is nothing at all. They're not pushing or pulling, so what we're going to do is establish the base and get the break. The final one, which is the real problem one, is the guy who begins to pull you in. He wants to get that arm anchored and makes it very difficult for you to apply this technique. You can still apply this technique, but what it takes is a prefix in order to solve the problem. And that prefix would just be go to the eye first. If you take the eye, what that'll necessarily do is loosen up this arm. Try it on anybody who's actually got their arm anchored and stiff like that, and you're going to find out. Don't tell them you're going to do it, and just do that really quick and watch what happens. They'll loosen up, and once you've loosened them up, now you can continue with the same technique, no problem. Okay, so let's walk through this one more time. So the ideal phase here is he's grabbing and not really doing it. He's just got you ready to go, maybe potentially trying to throw a right hand punch, so he's just getting ready to pull that right hand back to hit you, and that's where the technique starts. So how do we start with this first elbow? There's two things that can occur here with my step. One of them is I begin to do the step, and I do what's called jet lagging, and notice what just happened. My head stayed forward. That's a potential grab, or if it begins to pull at this point, I'm leaning forward and I've got a real problem because my back's not straight. So Kenpo is a lever-based system, so what we want to try and do is maintain our lever, and we don't want to jet lag. So how do we solve that problem? As we've said before, what you want to do is pretend you have a stick going down your back that you can't bend. So when I step, I keep my back up straight, my head goes back with me, and I'm not leaving my target available for the opponent. So as we begin to do that, notice how I stepped. I did not step like this and turn into the neutral bow. This technique is a two-step motion, not a single-step motion into a neutral bow. So what that means is I'm going to step back as if I'm going to go into a forward bow and then shift into that neutral bow in order to deliver the second piece. So let's show you how that works. So as you begin to do the step, what I want to do is get the upper hand with the left, establish my base. I don't really want to pull back too much to give him an alert so he doesn't begin to pull me, but just enough to where I'm starting to establish my next motion. Notice my right hand is hiding at my side. It's obscure to him so he can't see what's going on. And then the left hand or right hand will shoot up as if you're going to punch him in the face, and then at the last minute, as you turn, you're going to apply the lock. So let's do that one more time. So we're going to come across, potentially hit if we want, step back at the same time, turn, and execute at the same time. One of the problems is people will do this like they do sometimes. People do their upward blocks like this. If you are a Kenpo executioner, what you know is that we come up the center, and then we execute our blocks in a two-step motion, not in a single-step motion. We want to do that same thing here, but instead of doing it to our height level, we're going to do it to our chest level. So we set, come up, and apply the lock. Now, the difference between a lock and a break is the amount of pressure that you apply. In this case, we can do the lock, and what that will do, notice what happens to him. If he was trying to punch me, he no longer could do that. What's happening is I'm checking his height, I'm checking his depth, and I'm checking his width by applying this. If I apply more pressure, obviously the arm's going to break. And if I do break the arm, the next motion is going to be a problem, because if I come around and start doing the break, I may impale myself on his broken arm in here. So be careful when you're doing this technique. If you do happen to break the arm, you may want to just clear out and cover out and get away from the attack. Otherwise, you might impale yourself on the arm, so be wary of that. In this case, all we're going to do is apply the lock. We're not going to do the break and assume that we can continue forward with the technique. So let's go through this one more time. 1, 2. Now, from here, one of the problems that can arise is that we can go into what's called big circles, big problems. I come around here and I make this big circle. I've released all my checks on his height, depth, and width, and he can punch me. So to solve for that, what we want to do is we want to make this a smaller circle as we begin to apply the next motion. So let's talk about what and how we're going to do that next motion. One of the problems that could arise is I begin to pull directly towards me. And again, I've got the problem where he can throw the punch or he can headbutt me. So that's a problem. So how do we solve for that problem? The way we solve for that problem is imagine you have this guy's hand and you're going to pull it down at a 45-degree angle. You're going to do the exact same thing but without grabbing his hand. We're going to do what's called frictional pulling. So what that means is I'm going to use the friction of my arm against his arm in order to pull him towards me like that. So notice it was the same as if I was grabbing and pulling. He didn't give me that. He didn't know I was going to do it that fast. So you saw that it actually did what it was supposed to do. So from here, I come across in at a 45. And notice what happens. He starts moving towards me. If I don't do that, I begin to do this, we have that problem. So now, there's one more thing I want to talk about in here is how we're doing that motion. I could use my shoulder as my major pivot point here and just use the shoulder, or I could use my hand as a pivot point here and move it across that way, or I can do the combination of the two. So that's what I want to do is a combination of the two. I want both my hand and my shoulder as my pivot points, which helps me come down at that 45-degree angle. So what I want to do is this type of a motion. And see what happens with the hand. It shoots down at a 45 and it exposes his throat, which is my next shot. So once I've done that, and I've got this down at the 45, one of the problems is you might want to circle this back in to hit him. That's a problem. The reason why that's a problem is, one, I haven't taken advantage of what I just did to him previously, and two, I'm making a cock separate motion again, and I could potentially miss him. So to solve for that problem, what we want to do is reverse the motion that we took down to go back up at that 45. So what that means is, from here, I just want to shoot it right back up, right into the throat, and hit him in the same line that I took coming down. So let's do that one more time. So from here, I come down at the 45 and shoot that back up. You're doing what's called borrowing forces, borrowing his force. Notice he started moving forward. I'm using that forward momentum against him in order to hit. Notice he has to stop himself in order to get hit, because that forward momentum is coming pretty fast if you just do the frictional pull properly. So let's go through this one more time quickly. We want the two-step. We want to step with one, come up at that 45, keep your hand obscure until you need it, shoot it up, just like we do our upward blocks. Don't shoot it up flat. Next thing, once we've done that, make sure that we want to lock. Potentially don't break the arm or move on if you do break the arm. Small circle, big circles, big problems. Don't want to do that, so keep this small. So once we release the pressure, we now come down at the 45 instead of down flat towards us. And we want to use both our hand and our shoulder as a pivot point, and primarily hitting with a lowercase. This upper middle lowercase, we want more of a lowercase weapon here. As we do this shot, don't want to circle to come back in. We want to reverse the pattern back up at the 45, use the open-ended triangle here in order to hit them. So one more time a little bit quicker so you can see it. And then cross out if you wish to cross out. Hope this video helps you. Thank you very much.